Jeremy. How are you?
Hey Pete, good. How
Hey,
are you?
Pete.
Excellent. Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm super pumped for this fireside chat with two of my favorite sales authors, sales leaders, all of the above. Um, the illustrious Alea Homison and Jeremey Donovan, authors of Leading Sales Development. We're going to get into some introductions here in a second, but we're going to wait for folks that I think we had like 300 RSVPs. So there's a lot of people who are really excited to come hear y'all talk about leading sales development. So we're going to let people trickle in here for a hot sec. Before we kind of get jamming there, a little icebreaker. What was your most recent like interesting business trip that you had? Maybe Jeremy, we can start with you because I know that Inside Partners has you like jetting all over the United States and maybe outside of the United States as well.
Yeah,
What's the biggest one?
I have been jetting around. The biggest one was I got to go visit our portfolio companies out in Israel. We have, I
Whoa,
think, over 100 portcos in Israel and
really?
concentrated pretty heavily in Tel Aviv. Yeah, so I spent
Wow.
3 days working in Tel Aviv and 2 days on my own dime seeing Jerusalem. So that was a pretty amazing trip.
That's amazing. How is the fly fishing in Tel Aviv? Jeremy is a
That's yeah.
accomplished fly fisher, both
There,
both freshwater and saltwater. Was there any fly
There was
fishing that
there was
happened?
there was no, but there was definitely conversation had with some locals about fishing in the Mediterranean, but I did not have time to do that
Next time, next time.
next
Alea,
time.
what has been your most interesting business trip recently?
Oh, I don't know if I can compete with Jeremy's. I
I
mean,
know he kind of ruined it for us.
I know.
Damn
I'm not.
you, damn
I
you,
need a mic.
Donovan.
I need a mic.
I know. Yeah. Well, and I guess maybe not so much a business trip, but I did see, just with travel picking up post COVID and people getting comfortable. I was
Yeah.
actually in Montreal for a wedding of actually one of the
Oh,
SDRs that Jeremy and I hired back in the day at GLG,
no
and
kidding.
lots of AEs and folks from AlphaSense there to celebrate it. So not a formal business trip, but it was really great. And first time in Montreal, which was a fantastic city, great city
Yeah,
to be.
I hear great things about their bagels. Oddly,
Yes,
Montreal
yes,
bagels are
yeah.
excellent.
As
quite
a New Yorker for 16 years, I was
right.
like, but yeah. They it's different. It's like a chewier bagel. But yeah, they're known. They're competing with New York.
And
I'm
often in a wood oven, by the way. So that's the
oh.
other. Yeah, they're really good. You can get that in
Mm.
Vermont. Side note as well. The northern places that border. Well, Vermont does not border Canada, but you get the gist.
I love it exactly. And then of course you put like, maple syrup on top of that
Oh,
Vermont wood-fired bagel. I think probably the most interesting business trip I've been on is I'm actually in Atlanta right now.
Pete, we
Um,
didn't ask
it,
you.
oh, don't worry. I asked myself. That's what that's called? Assumptive. I'm in Atlanta right now because Atrium has a bunch of customers here. So I'm visiting a bunch of our customers here. And then, of course, our illustrious VP of Sales, Milena Call, who also lives here as well. So I try to do a good job of getting out here. So that's fun. Okay, awesome. Well, enough of that silly business chit chat. We're going to get into things here. So for folks who are, joining us for the first time, I'm really excited about showing like sharing sharing the best practices from Alea and Jeremy here. So this event is done by Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros, of course, is the nation's largest sales operations leadership and sales development leadership as well community. Um, and our mission here is to really to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about. The way that we do that is through awesome live sessions like this, an online forum, our quarterly summits, and we're starting to get back into in-person events. So if you're not already part of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. One kind of thing I would call out to folks, and I'm not able to bring this slide up for whatever reason, but MSP has their Revenue Excellence Summit coming up here in 2 weeks. Are either you speaking at that? Jeremy, you speaking on that? Oh, you know what it is? Another one of your colleagues at Insight is
Yeah, Hillary Headley, I think, right?
oh, Hillary is. Yeah. Like there's
Yeah, she was
yeah,
the head of Rev Ops over at Zoom, so she knows a thing or two about this world
about
as well.
about a thing or two. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. She yeah, so there's going to be 25 digital events. It's going to be illustrious people like, folks like these folks and kind of their ilk, sharing information with everybody. So it's 25 events over a 3-day period. We're going to go ahead and drop the registration link here in the chat, so you can go ahead and check that out. It's absolutely fantastic. You should join. You won't be disappointed. Before we kind of get started here with Alea and Jeremy, kind of talk about their book, which everybody who's attending today is going to get a copy of Leading Sales Development, which is important because it is my favorite sales development leadership book on the market, in particular because it focuses so heavily on the leadership part of it, the management part, the leadership part, et cetera, et cetera. But this event is sponsored by Atrium. So Atrium, I'm the founder of Atrium, the CRO. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. It's software that exists to help managers, so sales managers, SDR managers, leaders, reps use metrics to improve performance. And one of the really kind of cool things about Atrium is that it takes only a couple minutes to set up an account. You can just sign in with a read-only connection to your Salesforce account, and within 5 minutes you have a world-class metrics harness kind of telling you everything you need to know about your reps, who's kicking ass and why, and who kind of needs help. So that's a little bit on us, but I'd love to get into kind of the topic that we're covering here today. Let's do some introductions here first. Alea, we can start with you. Maybe you can kind of share a little bit of what you spend your time on these days at AlphaSense, and give folks a little bit of context on like what you worked on before and kind of how you got into the sales development realm.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I'm Alea. I lead our go-to-market strategy team at AlphaSense. And essentially what that means is our team is responsible for partnering across the organization to develop a go-to-market strategy in motion for when we take new products to market, when we enter new markets, whether those are new personas, new verticals, or new geographies, and partnering with our strategic finance team on build, buy, and partnership decisions. And so sales development is, for me, back earlier in my journey and earlier in my AlphaSense journey. And so I think we'll talk about this a little bit, but Jeremy and I had created a sales development team really coming out of a sales strategy project at GLG. And so one of the mandates that I had when I first joined AlphaSense was to, in addition to lead go-to-market strategy, was to build out sales development and sales enablement here. And so that's the overarching thread for Jeremy.
And if I recall correctly, GLG had a sales dev org that was like not small, was fairly muscular,
Yeah,
if I recall correctly.
Yeah, we built a pretty what do we have, 20-ish people right off the bat.
We ramped very quickly, to about 20 folks there.
And then didn't it scale larger than that, or am I misremembering? Maybe I'm thinking about a different organization.
We had it's one of the larger companies that people haven't heard of. It's like a $500 million privately held
Everyone's
business.
heard of GLG. Come on.
Yeah, some have, some haven't. But we extended a lot of the best practices that we were creating in the sales development function out to all of the reps across the company. So therefore, it definitely looked like a bigger prospecting organization, even beyond the SDR function.
Got it. Okay. Wonderful. And then JD, maybe you can kind of share with folks what you spend your time on now over there at Insight Partners, and kind of prior to that.
Yep. Well, prior to that, lots of things. I like to joke I'm the biggest fraud in sales because the only thing I've ever sold is mangoes at the side of the road. But like you guys,
Florida man.
Yeah, many of the folks on the call, I geek out on sales. There's probably very few decent sales books that I have not read, including like brand new ones that are coming out, including your book as well, Pete, Founding Sales. So at any rate, I was at Sales Loft most recently as the head of Rev Ops and Strategy, and then I joined Insight Partners back in January to help our portfolio companies scale faster. So I kind of went from operating to now interacting with, we have 600 portfolio companies. So
Oh
interacting
my
with
gosh.
with our portfolio companies to help them grow. And I see them at all stages, right? I see them starting sales development. I see them, evolving and iterating on it. So I get a lot of chances to learn and hopefully advise.
Nice. I love it. And I think prior to Insight, you were at Sales Loft for a few years. So people are definitely familiar with Sales Loft. And I think where we met was when you were first at CB Insights, working on sales operations and the sales development team there. So Jeremy's been around the block a couple times. Awesome. Well, I wish I had like a copy of Leading Sales Development right here. It's actually funny when I'm in San Francisco, I have my pile of like my favorite books next to me, so I can like bring them on to webinars right here and be like, Leading Sales Development, 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach, etc. But I'd love to just kind of chat with you guys a little bit around like what inspired the book, because I think for one of the reasons why I was so pumped up about Leading Sales Development when it came out, aside from the cover, which I think is also delightful, is the fact that it was so focused on like the management piece and the leadership piece, because this is something that we run into at Atrium. This is why I think we've probably like given out like 2,000 copies of Leading Sales Development at this point, because our point of view in Atrium land is that managers are under enabled, both from a training and from like a tooling standpoint. Obviously we focus on that from a metrical management standpoint for SDR managers and AE managers and what have you. But there's also the fact that like people get promoted and it's like, all right, congratulations, you're in charge of some things, and like have fun storming the castle, right? And there's lots of books on like SDRing, but there wasn't much on like SDR management. So maybe Alea, you can kind of share a little bit of like what inspired you guys, because like you guys have day jobs. You're not like full-time authors. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think it started. Well, I think, Jeremey is one of my dearest friends. And I think we were just catching up. And I forget which one of us, but one of us was like, oh, I miss working with you. I miss brainstorming with you. I just miss that like intellectual partner, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think from that we said, well, let's write a book. Since we can't work together day to day, let's write a book. And so there's a couple different topics that, I think we had bounced around, and we landed on sales development because of our combined work at GLG, building out sales development there. But then also at AlphaSense, like I mentioned, when I joined, created the sales development team here for the first time, grew that to about 50, and have since handed it over. They say hire amazing talent that can do what you do better than you can do it. Yeah, and so yourself. The amazing Katie Ditano leads that team currently. Now it's a team of 110. And so just from those back-to-back experiences,
oh my gosh,
building and growing and handing that off, it felt like I was like, oh, I think I have a lot to say around sales development at the moment. And we had that nice combined experience. So that's at least how I remember how we got there. I don't know.
Yeah. It's similar, but I was like, I had
Jeremy's like, I just blacked out.
No, I had more Machiavellian motives, which was, yes, Lee and I are extremely close friends. Yes, we're incredible thought partners when we work together. We've been trying to find a way to be in the same company again. Post GLG, the stars just haven't aligned. But I saw what she created. Like she took what we did at GLG and at AlphaSense, just like next leveled it in terms of how you lead a team. And I have seen and had seen so many places where the manager SDR relationship was adversarial, and or that the manager was not on top of the team. And Alea, to blow some smoke her way, she's the epitome of radical candor, right? Like share deeply and challenge directly. And the way part of this is I learned this is I reach out to her. I'm like, how do I get our team at Sales Loft to operate more effectively? And she gave me the tip that, we were holding reps accountable. I believe in holding reps accountable to some kind of activity metric. Yeah. And we were holding reps accountable to a weekly activity metric, but just everything was getting jammed up on Friday. And she's like, no, you got to hold them to 50 calls a day. And I said, really, what do you do when you do that? And she said, Well, I walk up to, this is pre-COVID, right? I walk up to them or I Slack them or whatever, like, you're at 49, just one more.
Hi.
You're at 48, just two more. And the team, like, she just went to one of the SDR's weddings, right? So like the team loves her. And I wanted to capture that mojo. So, I was like, hey, do you want to spend
Let's
like
document
10 or 20 hours just on the phone chatting through and then editing a book, another 20, 20, 30 plus hours editing a book together. And she was down for it. So yeah, that was the motivation.
That's fantastic.
Called
Yeah.
TLDR, steal Alea's ideas. But she's
I
the lead
love it.
author on the book, so she got credit.
Yeah, I think that's something, I mean, that it is that a lot of folks struggle with, a lot of managers, a lot of new sales development managers, and also AE managers struggle with as well, is like, what is your role? Especially if you're coming, and like this is not the case with you, Alea, especially if you're coming from a sales development, like a sales development rep background, and like, maybe you're being battlefield promoted, and and like potentially you're managing people who used to be peers of yours, or maybe people that like you don't have that much distance from a a time distance and an age kind of offset standpoint, so it can kind of feel a little weird. And so without proper guidance, what people can they can like, oh, am I supposed to just be like a mean ogre who's just like activity, 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 activity? Or alternatively, am I supposed to be like everybody's best friend, which is also not like a recipe for success. But how do you kind of like blend those things? Obviously, Radical Candor is a phenomenal framework there. Kim Malone Scott's book. She's also a small investor in Atrium. A little pro tip for you guys there. But I think that's actually a really fantastic kind of way of characterizing that. I had no idea that you guys had gotten up to 100 SDRs at AlphaSense. That's like very substantial. Like I was talking to DocuSign the other day. If you guys had to guess how many SDRs DocuSign has, what would you guess?
Now I got to guess high, right? It's like
I know, now it feels like a trick question.
I'm like 300.
Alea?
Oh man, I don't know. I'll say
you just have to go 299 or 301 to win, right? One way or the other.
I'm gonna go one.
Well, this is not the prices, right? I think they have like it was either 400 or 500. It's pretty substantial. My buddy Andrew Riesenfeld used to run SDR there. He's actually recently moved over to ZoomInfo, where he runs their sales development organization. Very similarly sized sales dev organization over at ZoomInfo. That's a next level sales org. Right there.
I don't know if ZoomInfo does this with the SDRs, but Henry Schuck, the CEO, was on a podcast recently. I think it was a SaaStr podcast. And he said they do this thing where they stack rank their AEs into levels 1 through 4. And every month or quarter, I don't know the exact frequency, if you're like in level 2, then the level you're in determines the leads that you get. Yep. So if you're in level 2, you get the level 2 leads. And if you're in the top 20%, you move to level 1 for that period. If you're in the bottom 20% of level 2, you move down to level 3. So you can move levels, but that's a pretty intense.
It's like Champions League, soccer relegation and promotion stuff. You might be remembering he did a fireside chat at the last MSP Revenue Excellence Summit, where he's talking about a number of things that the ZoomInfo SDR organization does. It's like pretty remarkable. One is that they have a 90-second SLA on inbound leads, so speed to lead there is extremely important. And then they do the round robining that you're describing. They essentially do intelligent round robining, like you're talking about there. Wonderful. So you actually, just for folks at home who might be thinking about like writing their own book on, I don't know, sales development or or sales, or I don't know, gardening. How, like, maybe you guys can like take us through the process a little bit. You kind of mentioned a little bit about like, lots of shared phone time or what have you, but how long did it end up kind of taking in aggregate, and like maybe you can share kind of how you guys went about doing that?
Wow, which one of us should start? We probably have two different perspectives, but they're complementary. You want to go first, Alea?
Yeah, I mean, I think we start with the idea. I would say most important is to pick someone that you actually respect their ideas, like before you do anything, because you will spend a lot of time. And I think you want to not only spend time with a partner that shares some of your philosophical ideas about the topic, but also someone that's going to be comfortable debating and challenging. I think you really want that as your partner to get a really quality end product out there in a book. And you also be spending lots of time together. So I think it's important that you like each other in that way, right?
Seems useful.
Yeah. So I think it's important to pick the right person. And then, like I mentioned, Jeremy and I first decided we wanted a partner to write a book together. And then we kind of put pen to paper on here are all the topics that like we're most interested in, we're most curious about, and then had a productive dialogue on let's pick, which one for this moment right now. And so that I think was an important second step. And then our flow, which may or may not work for everyone. I know, Jeremy, you've written with others before, but like our process was then create a skeleton for an outline. We spent a lot of time. What is that order? What is that flow? Make sure that outline felt rational, reasonable, which may sound basic, but if you get that wrong, you're going to spin your wheels. And so spend a lot of time on the flow of the book and the outline. And then really what we did is we would spend time and Jeremy would ask me questions and I would answer and we'd talk through and we kind of converse and debate and we'd record those calls. And then we'd translate those into text and then we'd edit and copyright together and then send it off to have it published at the highest level. That was
that was spot on. I think if I were to add, underscore the outline thing, we spent a ton of time outlining, and that's critical, and not to the excruciating detail, but I would say like 2-3 levels down on any given topic, so that we could not that the outline was sort of the left brain logical side there, and then what we ended up talking and fleshing out was the story part of it. We also, I think for book writers, the other things I think to think about, maybe one is, I read a ton. I probably read a book a week, and I get really frustrated seeing the same anecdotal stuff recycled over and over again. So be original. Go search scholar.google.com and go find complementary academic research that hasn't necessarily been cited a billion times that you can use. So like that to me is important. I think the other thing about book writing is, we did talk about who's our audience, right? Like, who do we want to read this? And we said we want this to be a book for, sales development leaders or people trying to stand up a sales development function. And there's not a lot out there because a lot of books are written for, for bigger audiences. And we didn't. For us, it was about expressing, and I think this is important. I talk to people who want to write books, and they say like, I want to, basically I want to make money while I sleep. And book writing is 99,000 out of 100,000 times a money losing proposition.
Totally.
And see, it has to be a labor of love, like it has to be because you want to express an idea that you have. And if you give one copy to a family member, that's good enough.
I love it. Yeah, actually, I was reminded that Hannah was reminding me that that we actually have an offer that we wanted to share with folks who are attending today. We call it the Sales Development Survival Guide. It's got, of course, a copy of Leading Sales Development here, and then David Delaney's Sales Development Framework, which has parts of management and leadership in it, but it's more kind of like process orientated and kind of what have you. And then we have these fun coffee is for openers YETI mugs that we'd love to send out. So I think we're actually going to drop a link in the chat, so if folks would like to get a copy of each of those books, and then also one of those Yetis, they can go ahead and sign up for that. On the research side of things, this is something that I really, really enjoyed in the book. There's of course there's many things that I really enjoyed in the book, but using kind of like the actual metrics, because there's the cool thing about SDRing is like, because there's a lot of behavior going on, even if you don't have an organization of 100 reps like AlphaSense, there's enough sample size where you can make like pretty good judgments. One of the things that you guys talk about quite a bit in there is SDR hiring, and kind of successful SDR hiring profiles and less successful SDR hiring profiles. Can you guys maybe share a little bit with the audience what the kind of data showed around those compelling backgrounds and kind of like the profiles that ended up being the most successful with respect to new SDR hires?
Yeah, you want me to Yeah.
Go, because you hired all these like insanely great people. I actually think I'm pretty mediocre at hiring, so I want to hear it from you.
Oh, you're too kind. Yeah. So in the book, we tried to dive into, understand. A lot of times people say, "Oh, this will make a good hire, this will make a good hire," and I think we certainly had our own perspectives, but we tried to say, okay, what can we go back and have the data support actually move the needle? And so, we looked at a couple things. We looked at, this idea of the school you go to is an indicator of success. And when we looked at the data, we actually found that did not matter, right? It was much more important what you did when you were there versus the actual school that you went to. We looked at what your major was and if that moved the needle. And what we learned there was that STEM degrees moved the needle and political science degrees were the two degrees that kind of popped off the page. I think they were followed by, I think, humanities and business, but STEM and poli-sci were
business then humanities, though.
Business then humanities.
Yeah.
Right. So we saw that moved the needle. We took a look at displaying sports move the needle, and I think this was one of the biggest surprises for us. Is you hear a lot of times of people that are in sports translate great to sales, and actually overarchingly the answer to that is it does not. It's not statistically significant enough to move the needle. We then cut team sports versus individual sports. And I think also surprising to us, the data suggested that if sports moved the needle, it was individuals that were in solo sports, not team sports, that actually tended to perform better, which again, initially was counterintuitive to us. But then the more we thought about it, was well, those folks have no one else to scapegoat to, right? So they're the level of accountability that you have for your own actions, right, ends up popping. We also took a look at, I think, GPA, which for us, again, we were trying to anchor it in data. And I think for us, we're not as many people post their GPA, so it was inconclusive for us.
Yeah, hard to get the data.
And then I think the last thing we looked at is prior work experience. And we took a look at it in a couple different ways of if you had prior work experience that was definitively an indicator that you would be more successful in the role. And then we also did a gut check on folks that jump around a little bit. And so the caveat to that is prior work experience is an indicator of success in the sales development role, as long as that prior experience isn't multiple jobs for less than 12 months. So that was the caveat to that. I think those were the key things we looked at. I don't know, Jeremy, if I've forgotten anything.
Yeah, I mean,
JD?
He got it all. Yeah, two or three. She got it all. I mean, 2 or 3 years. If I had to hire any SDR, I would hire one that had 2 to 3 years of prior work experience at a recruiter, at an agency recruiting. There's 100%. A lot of them. It is hard to find STEM people. We saw some lawyers in the data. Those were good. Teachers are good. It's just there's not as many of them available. There's also who not to put in the role. We found that people who move from CS into the SDR world, unless they're an inbound SDR, that doesn't generally work out.
Yeah, not enough reach out and grab them.
Yeah, you gotta and I think it's an issue with. It's also where do you go after being an SDR? Is if you're an outbound SDR, it's a natural path, obviously, into being an AE. If you're my experience is if you're an inbound SDR, it's a very hard road to move from SDRing to AE. I see a lot of inbound SDRs move into CS or into marketing.
Yeah. I love Vic. It looks like our buddy Victor Sowers is here. Lovely.
Hey, Victor.
He makes an excellent point here. Teach for America, career switchers, great source in the past, 100%. I think essentially what you want to look for is characteristics. So things that train behavior and then filter, right? And so a good example of that would be the training the behavior would be things like poli-sci background, business background, and then humanities background. We are in the communication business. We are communicators, but you can't just be a communicator. You have to be a communicator who can do it at scale and isn't afraid when somebody tells them to, go pound sand, right? And I think that's where things individual sports, kind of some of my biggest pro tips there are rowers.
Mm.
Oh yeah, love pain.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Just love it. Right.
Wake
just
up early, right?
5 a.m. Just like,
Yeah.
like on the erg by yourself, right? Very metrics driven. There it is. It's on the wall right there. See how you're in the lower third? No, like I'm not mad at you. It just is, right? And so
Yeah.
if you want to get up there, you need to put in the calories, there. And then I think from a career switcher standpoint, if you think about like the filtration stuff, like things that are filtered, like I always joke about this with like Uber drivers or Lyft drivers. Usually they're pretty chill for the most part, right? They're pretty chill. It's kind of like UPS drivers, like they're completely chill. And the reason why, even when like people are driving around them being like absolutely bananas, and the reason why is because if you're not chill as like an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, a UPS driver, like you're gone in 3 months.
You're gonna burn out.
You're
Yeah,
just
I've only had one ever who
you're
was
like
honking and angry, and I wanted to get out of the Uber because
but
that's
presumably
odd.
like you probably would have a hard time finding him in 6 months. But like hospitality is a phenomenal example of that, or like Teach for America is a phenomenal example of that, right? Like you throw somebody into like an inner city school where they have to do like chemistry teacher with a bunch of kids who like maybe don't necessarily want to be there and are like calling them names or whatever, and like their hormones are going off the charts. That's probably like a pretty good filter there. We've had a lot of success with former hospitality folks as well, insofar as like bartenders, servers, etc. They're all like selling behaviors. There's less of a rejection component to it, but there certainly is like people being assholes to you and kind of contending with that.
Greg Cassell, right, the founder and CEO of Revenir, they hire gobs of SDRs, and he swears by hospitality, right? And he's got like more data than any of us, I think, on SDR talent.
Good for calling. It's one of those things where you have to be careful about like written communication and kind of like multi-threading and kind of stuff like that. But it's kind of one of those things where you just have to be aware of like, what skills are being brought to bear and like where the gaps are and like how you're going to have to coach on that. Like, hey, this is how to send a calendar invite. This is how to use formatting in an email, even though most of the time your communication has been via iMessage. Not like old people like you and me, Jeremy.
Yeah. By the way,
Alea's in between. She's the iMessage crowd.
I don't think this is in the book because we figured it out afterwards, but we also did a study of it. And since we're talking about leading sales development, we also looked at profiles of SDR leaders. And interestingly, there it turns out that again, if I had to do it, if I had to do it again, I would exclusively hire SDR leaders who were AEs. So they like the ideal is they went from SDR to AE inside of the organization, promote them back up to SDR leader, and then their track is now a management path. So they're going to go after that to an SMB leader. Those folks tend to do so much better than, my number two would be SDRs from the inside, promote them to SDR manager. But I don't love that because it's not a great career path, because then they have to go back down to become an AE in order to manage again.
Closing.
It's a weird progression. And in my experience, the worst, again, it's like there's a zillion exceptions. We're talking about probability differences here, but I want to maximize my probability of success is to hire an SDR manager from another organization into your organization. I've not had success doing that.
Alea, at this point, I would imagine, so if you guys had 100 SDRs over at AlphaSense, that's probably like 8 SDR managers. Holy mackerel. Ish. What are the kind of the backgrounds of those SDR? Are they all SDR promos from within AlphaSense? Are they, some external hires? What's the kind of mix there?
Yeah. So we have a mix. One of them was one of the SDRs that we hired at GLG that went on to be an account executive, that then came back to SDR management at a different organization and then over to AlphaSense.
That's literally everything that Jeremy just said.
Yep. So
it's like the mixture of those two.
Yeah. So we have one of those, like, I guess, as close to ideal as you can get. And she's phenomenal. We do have a person that was an SDR manager for several years at another organization that has come over. And again, I mean, to Jeremy's point, there's always exceptions to the rule. That person is an exception to the rule. And so those are the two senior most SDR managers. And of course, we have our senior director, that Katie Ditano that I mentioned. And then a lot of the managers underneath those two are internal promotes from our SDR team.
Love it.
So we have a little bit of a blend there. And of course, like anyone, we've had folks with similar profiles to those folks that have been in those roles and not been successful. So it is a, like anything, it's also the person and the background and the role. But
yeah, I think I might have been talking with you about this, Jer, but I think kind of like the pattern, if you can get to this sufficient scale where you can accommodate these sort of things, and maybe a lot of people in our audience don't have like the fancy pants problems of like 100 SDRs or like 150 As or whatever, but it's like it's like a 2-to-1 ratio of internal promos to external hires, because what you're doing is you have, especially like in a more complicated sales motion, and like AlphaSense as an example is like, I don't want to say that's complicated sales motion or whatever, but it's like it's not a joke of a product. It's a real, like, it's a research management and search tooling for, for finance professionals, for hedge fund professionals, for research professionals, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, it's not like, you're slinging like a calendar link or what have you, or like, Slack. And so, the more complicated the sales motion, the more kind of like nooks and crannies there are around like messaging, kind of like, personas and so on and so forth. And like all that stuff can be documented by having that where it's like people have it in their brain. And then you bring in other people who have like best practices from other organizations. I was joking with our VP of sales, Melina Call, was a sales leader at SalesLoft, and then also Flock Safety. She always jokes, like when there's like email threads going around, she says, well, at SalesLoft we did it by like XYZ, and then like now she's kind of self-conscious about it. I'm like, no, that's actually important, right? It's important that you're saying these things, because like these are things that other folks have like figured out. Like, we're not going to take it whole cloth, right? Like, sight unseen, but it is important to kind of bring those things in from other organizations.
Yeah. Well, I think a key thing too is like that differentiates success or lack thereof with folks that come in from the outside is like the individual, Matt Alfano, who I'm thinking about, that is an external hire for us, is right. He's had his own career journey and has decided, in the same way that the other manager is, what they feel like is the thing they're most passionate about for at least the immediate term that they can see out for their career is developing and coaching sales dev talent. And I think if you have someone that knows that that's the place, they've done other things and that's where their heart is, that's where their mind is, like that, like that is irreplaceable with like your senior most sales dev talent, which probably is a bit obvious, but it's hard to find, because I think sometimes people are like, is this a stepping stone? But if you can find those folks that have done many other things and say, for the right reasons, because it's such a pivotal point in other folks' career, right? It's for all of the right reasons that they want to be doing that and nothing else, even though they could do other things. Those, I mean, those are going to be your superstars.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the good news there is that like sales development is like so critical. And I want to talk about a little bit about kind of like sales development and kind of like the kind of current economic environment here in a second, but it's related to this comment, which is like sales development, like, it's extraordinarily important for organizations from a pipe gen standpoint, and make organizations efficient and what have you. And so I think that it's more and more being observed that it's not just a stepping stone. Like, I'm not just here doing my time to get, now, somebody might say, hey, I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna do it for like 4 years, as an example. Right. And like they're really passionate about, like, I'll give you an example of this. So a friend of mine, a woman named Cindy Shibitani, she leads a fairly large part of the inside sales organization over at Procore. But her background is an SDR for a long time. And actually, before she was in SDR management, she actually has a background in counseling, kind of like youth counseling. And I know you guys are reacting because you're like, aha, yes, like managing 23-year-olds and like all the things that are like all the ups and downs,
and it's
and
hard,
ins and outs.
like, it's also hard, right? Like, you want to, SDRing is easy after you do a job like that.
Yeah, exactly. But importantly, like, so she was running the SDR organization over at Procore, and ended up taking on more of the the inside sales kind of like velocity motion stuff. So because I think what ends up happening as a sales development leader, if you think about the required capabilities to get all like force management on us here, that you need for that leader, it's like you got to be able to motivate and like guide and coach, but then also you have to be able to manage by metric. And so this is something that I think is, other parts of the sales organization are oftentimes on the back foot about, especially if you're like in an enterprise sales organization or what have you. And it's just like the SDR organizations are far more advanced when it comes to like metrical instrumentation and managing by metric, which then makes it such that you have the muscles to manage those other parts of the organization, whether SMB or commercial or mid-market. Probably not the enterprise side of things, but essentially like SDR managers kind of like live in the data-driven future, if you will, and so you build those muscles up appropriately. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys about is like, I think a lot of organizations are seeing some kind of economic headwinds that are happening right now. You're kind of seeing, maybe organizations are right-sizing their sales team, which then has implications associated with like the size of the SDR organization. What are some of the things that you guys would recommend right now around, driving more efficiency? Right, because like before it was like grow. Yeah, we're going to add a bunch more SDRs. Oh, you only produce like 4 ops a month. Well, that's more than 0. So that yay, right? It's an income 104 versus now saying, hey, you really got to pay for your salary. In fact, you actually got to like 3x or 4x, the value of your salary from a booking standpoint. What are some kind of guidance that you give for folks kind of like shifting from like, wild west to like, hey, we need to be way more responsible. We need to be more efficient and focusing in on that.
I mean, and from what I've been seeing as companies, do adjust their sales capacity, the capacity models tend to stay similar, right? So, Benjamin in the chat was asking about SDR to AE ratios. There are benchmark ratios, but you actually can use a calculator, and Pete, you probably have one. I definitely have one that you can use to determine the optimal SDR to AE ratio. A little minority report going on.
I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, and I definitely have one. I could probably flash on the screen if you guys wanted. But anyway, so those capacity models are similar. So I don't know there's a whole heck of a lot that the SDRs and SDR leaders themselves directly need to do, because there's so much in the zeitgeist right around how to improve SDRing. For me, I think the efficiency side is things that like maybe leadership does, but I think more RevOps does. So, if you have SDRs, sitting in a lot of non-selling time, right? Like a lot of internal meetings, try to cut that out. There's necessary training and enablement, but don't subject them to things that are going to take them, quote unquote, off the floor for too much. So I think you can gain a humongous amount of time back. The other thing is SDRs spend it, I have historically liked to do as much for the SDR as possible. I mean, the holy grail, and this is very difficult, is assign their accounts to them and assign, the contacts to them. I think that's a very difficult thing to do. I did talk to, this was actually the head of sales development at I think he was at Verizon, or I think it was Verizon at the time. And they did this cool thing where they outsourced to somebody else to load the cadences on behalf of the SDRs. So they, like, this outsourced agency would do all that account selection, all the contact selection, and the SDR would then, tune and personalize and press go and do all the calling and everything else from the initial load. That's next level, right? I mean, that's a Verizon level kind of thing. But as much as you can offload from the SDRs of unproductive time that they, I mean, it's productive in a different way, but like non-selling time, the better.
The lower value added kind of efforts. Alea, what would you kind of recommend people focus on when it comes to, so Jeremy's the TLDR on Jeremy's thing is like, hey, look, like make sure that you're not having them spend any time on things that are not the highest and best use of their time. And that can come in a variety of formats. What would your kind of recommendations be there, Alea?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've done in the current economy, and really frankly, just since COVID, is really just openly talk about mental health with our sales development team. Because I feel like pre-COVID, that role is already like the hardest role in sales, right? For all of the reasons that all of us know. Add to that a global pandemic. Add to that, for many folks in this role that, are kind of stuck at home, or if they're in big cities, right, stuck in apartments that may or may not have windows. And so we've really tried to remember that they're humans on the team and talk through those experiences so that when they're coming into work, right, they are in a place that they feel comfortable bringing their whole selves. And if they need to, in their own way, recharge, right, like when they're on, but let them know that they can take that time to recharge and work with them to figure out what that is for them specifically. And so that's going to be many, many different things for each person and each team and each org. But that's the thing, if I think about just the last couple of years, that feels different from a lot of the things that, right, that you can read about and have been written about. That's the big change that we've seen with our sales dev team.
Yeah, totally. I do a master class on managing and motivating hybrid work from home sales organizations, and I think that point is really well taken. It turns out that sales is hard. And there's a variety of reasons why having people that are like sitting next to each other, if possible. I'm waiting for better technology solutions to kind of like simulate this. They haven't really shown up yet. But like we always think about sitting next to people as being like learning, like, hey, can you look at this email right here, like this obnoxious objection that's coming back here, and help me with it. But I think a thing that we underappreciate is like you're on the call with someone and they're like, oh, but no, just 1 second. Okay, bye. And of course, and then you just turn to the person next to them and they're like, man, that sounded terrible. And it's like, yeah, it was. And just like have that kind of like moment, right? Versus like someone's like, a goofball to some SDR and they're kind of sitting there and like they're sitting in the silence of their kitchen. They're like, oh.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that like
real lonely, real fast. Yeah. I think, it's good to just know that other people have the same challenges and are facing the same things and can say, that was brutal. I had one worse the other day, right? Like that's really helpful sometimes, just like for your psyche,
Oh yeah.
So we had
sure.
like to that point too, there was folks when we first went into COVID, like that April and May, I remember we had 2 folks on the team. One person, we talked a lot about introvert extroversion, right? Like, and then being okay saying, what you need and what you're not getting. And we had a person on the team that was so extroverted and was comfortable acknowledging it that they actually opened we use Zoom, but opened a Zoom room, not to chat, but just so they could see that someone else would be working separately but like just so they could see a face, because they were in New York in a, in an apartment that was other folks and their room had no window. Like, so I think, just helping people understand themselves in the context of that environment and coming up with creative solutions to help them through it.
Yeah, I am waiting for the technology solutions there. I haven't seen it yet, but like essentially like the buzz of the sales floor or being able to lean over to someone and be like, that sucked. Obviously, like I always look at these things from a metrics through a metrics lens, because hey, I got a one-track mind. What do you want? But I think that like when you're like focusing in on efficiencies, a really important thing, and this is true with AEs as well. Like oftentimes people think about data-driven sales management is just about like counting quantity, like quantity of activities, quantity of email, quantity of calls, quantity of like new accounts touched or new contacts touched. When things become more scarce, like, and maybe you're an inbound SDR or you're an outbound SDRing and like using but like scarce information, like intent signals and things like that, those are actually like precious Fabergé eggs, right? And so ensuring that people are like working things appropriately and focusing on those quality metrics ends up being very important. So like focusing in on things like, hey, touches per account, right? Like you can't just touch it and set it back down again, right? Like touches per contact, touches per account. You'd be shocked. Like when we work with different customers, we hop into their data because we sell on customer data, and you actually like you say, okay, here's your 20 SDRs right here. You want to see how well they're multi-threading, and then you stack rank them. Some people who are up here like engaging 2.5, 3.5 contacts in any given kind of in any given account, and then there's other folks who are down here at like 1.3, and you're like, oh my goodness, what? And people like have this moment where they're like, holy mackerel, like you are just like working your accounts like terribly there. Or then you look at things like touches per account. It's like, oh my gosh, like this person is like picking up a lead, touching it once, sending it back down again, and then it's like off into the ether. And I think that like people underappreciate those quality metrics and how they can be used from a changing rep behavior standpoint. Because if you just provide a little guidance, they're like, hey, why are you not multi-threading enough there? Oh, well, because like no one really trained me on how to go into Zoom info and find other personas. Oh, well, let's fix that. That's easy. Like this is easy to do. Like let's just fix that. So I think that would be my big thing, would be quality metrics.
Well, and I think exposing that to the whole team too. And so I know we talk a lot about like stack ranking, which I think that in and of itself serves its purpose. But even just exposing some things like that, because I think it exposes the art of what's possible to folks, right? I think it's easy to say, oh, that's hard or this. And then you see a couple people just blowing the socks off something in the best way. And then you go, oh, that's what's
exactly. Bobby's touching 4 contacts per account. Like he's a normal human. Like I actually think I'm a little better than him. Like I guess I should just
make something feel like more achievable, right? Versus, because I think sometimes it can be like, oh, I've got all of these things, but when they can see that other folks, and then and then it's just a matter of like, how do I get there, right? It's possible.
Yeah, it's like norming, because I think when people think about like externalizing metrics to folks, they think about like old school kind of like gamification, or kind of like bottom leaderboard sort of things, or like all the like the monitors on the sales floor that like nobody really pays attention to. But it is more about like, you need to be at the top, versus just like norming, which is kind of what we're talking about, which is like, hey, here we are in this organization, we do at least 2.5 contacts per account. In this organization, we touch our accounts at least 5 times in the trailing 30 days, or else you're not like, an official AlphaSense SDR, right? And so just externalizing that in a way where people understand it, it can be very powerful. One thing I wanted to ask you guys about, since you guys are always on the, especially you, Jeremy, who now you're like a little honeybee, like butterfly that like goes back and forth, like pollinating best practices between portfolio companies. In SDR, oftentimes it's like a arms race. A new channel is exposed. You want to like use that new channel in order to garner attention from an outbound standpoint, or what have you. And then other people kind of get hip to it, and then that channel maybe fills up a little bit. So what would be some thoughts that you guys might have on underutilized channels right now that folks are having success? Maybe Jeremy, what have you seen kind of across the Insight portfolio that has been working for folks?
Yeah, I mean, people still rely on the traditional stuff for the most part. Anything that's what I sort of observed is that anything that shows that a human took time and energy to do something relevant for another human matters. We can get into the whole argument about like personalization versus general relevance, and there are cases to be made on both sides. I don't think it's one or the other, but the what I don't think works is, and it did for a period of time, is, hey, I saw that you wrote this post on LinkedIn, whatever, like that now is kind of tired, right? I think now it's much more about connecting to their business problems. It's like, hey, I was listening to your CEO, blah blah blah, talk about such and such. It's both, exactly. And then the other thing I think that's effortful is, and it has to be different, right? Like the embedded video with the holding up the card thing, that was novel in the beginning, and now I think is ignored. But LinkedIn, right, allows you to do a voice message to somebody, or allows you to do a video message, and that's been around for 2-3 years. Very few, like I can't remember I still get prospected a ton. I can't remember the last time I got a video or voice message via LinkedIn. So massively underutilized channel.
Yeah. Alea, any kind of thoughts on underappreciated channels right now?
What's interesting, the LinkedIn voice recorder, I remember it has been around for, I think, 2 years. When it first came out, our CRO got one and was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. And he totally responded. And so I think that's underutilized. I think I'll just echo Jeremy's first point of, it's a lot of, the traditional channels. My philosophy is always anything worth doing is worth doing well. So if you're going to do something, do it right right? Connect with that person versus, like Jim said, we have floors, obviously, so there's certain expectations with level of activity, but make sure those are at a level that allows someone to do good work, not just to do work, right? It's important that people are able to connect, and it takes time to figure out a good way to connect with someone versus just try to do the same thing you did with the last person. So it's this balance of doing good work, but also doing it at scale, right? I don't think often people say, well, okay, it's either quantity or quality. And I said, no, it's not an or, it's an and. And it's
you got to do both.
the SDR leader's job to figure out where's that balance so that you can get the scale, but you can also get the great work. So that efficiency and that effectiveness of that work pops.
And it's like the Paul Graham thing about like do things that don't scale. You do the things that don't scale to start, and then you put your little like operations brain on. You're like, how can I maybe like scale this up a little bit here? How can I make how can I tokenize this? How can I make these mail merges? One thing that actually we do quite a bit here that I'll share with folks that's kind of related is we're a big fan. Like, I mean, this conversation is an example of this. We're a big fan of like physical assets because they don't have to be costly. That's what the interesting thing is, that like, most paperback books are, $10 or what have you. Another thing that we do is we do these really cool like data driven interpretation, like metrics driver tree laminates. Obviously the Yetis are like, they're not free by any stretch of the imagination, but I think Jeremy's point is really well taken, which it's almost kind of like blockchain stuff around like proof of work and what have you. And what you have to do though is you really have to connect it to them, right? Like sending somebody something that's like has your logo on, and they're like, I don't give a hoot about Atrium. Get out of here. But as a sales professional, oh, you have a thing that says like make it rain on it, and I can like take that to my kid's soccer game. Okay, that's kind of funny because that celebrates me as a professional. I think we'll drop a couple links here, but yeah, like, and then you can do it on a persona basis. Like this right here is coffees for openers, which is a funny kind of little joke. We have coffees for closers ones as well, coffees for coaches. This is one that's like more managerial facing. Another thing that we've really appreciated, and like where you can kind of merge these together, is SMS can be really powerful as well. Not cold SMS, like going outbound with SMS is a great way of like pissing people off. But if they come inbound and they're kind of like lapsed, like either if they come inbound and they didn't convert for like whatever that offer was, but they dropped their information, one of the things you can do is you can SMS with them. This is actually funny. So our organization actually uses a piece of software called OpenPhone. It's a third-party VoIP solution that allows you to do both calling and SMS stuff. They're actually a Atrium customer as well. But one of the things you can do is you can send images via SMS. And so whereas like the traditional sales engagement solutions, like the Outreaches and the Sales Loft of the world, you can send text only, but you can't put image MMS payloads in there. And so that actually can be pretty powerful, because if somebody, it's like, hey, you forgot your Yeti, or hey, you signed up for your copy of Leading Sales Development, and I really want to get it to you. Here's this like really nice image of the Leading Sales Development book, with the really nice cover with the seagulls. That really drives a lot of reaction there. I agree with you guys about the LinkedIn stuff as well. I think that LinkedIn is a really underutilized channel. Even the in-mails, it just can't be done in a dumb way, because I think people kind of, it feels like maybe a little personal for folks. And so what do people call it? The pitch slap. Like I LinkedIn connect you, I immediately hit you with a pitch versus doing something that's
I disconnect with people who do that.
But versus doing something that's a little bit more thoughtful. Right, especially thinking about it from an SDR standpoint, right? Like, if you can LinkedIn connect with somebody who's like maybe more senior in their career, maybe share a piece of content with them from your marketing organization, and then you're not like puking up like 2 paragraphs of text on them immediately. The other thing I think that is underappreciated with LinkedIn is that people can kind of treat it as like iMessage a little bit, like chat. Like if you treat LinkedIn messaging more like text than you treat it like email, oftentimes that can really help.
I know we're running out of time, but I'll throw in really quickly. But the coffee is for Closers mug is my favorite mug, so thank you. But I'm mostly in buying mode, right? So as a buyer, what do I need? The the pleasant persistence, short messages, so that you're
Sure.
I'll be ignoring, and then my boss will say, hey, we need XYZ, and then your email lands in my inbox. Like, I think it's all about the timing. And then also on the value side, like, I do think you're doing unique stuff with the type of swag you send out. And I think it's the uniqueness. I'm reminded of, HubSpot when they had their grader. They might still have it. That was just a killer asset for marketing people. Or Drift did like an inbound response benchmark. Like these kinds of things that are ways for SDRs to reach out and actually offer value that's relevant to the person.
Lead with value and content.
Yeah, we did it at SalesLoft we created find-business-email.com, and like what do SDRs need? They need to find the freaking business email. So like,
well,
just
and also
I
think
to do that.
Yeah, I think you guys also did this subject line grader as well. But I think if you can show up with value first, and it doesn't have to be like a nice Yeti mug or something like that. It can actually be like, I don't know, most like boring white papers probably wouldn't land, but maybe it's a cool little calculator that actually is just a Google sheet. Alea, do you have any kind of parting thoughts on how to humanize outreach for folks to kind of like break through noisy channels?
I mean, I'm a little old school. I think take time to research people, to try to understand them, and then take the time to craft something that connects with them. I'm a big believer in persistence and things like that, of course. But I think the reason that some of the things like LinkedIn, like to your point, like there's no way to do it like in a dummy with mail merges and things like that, which makes it harder, which makes people know that you have to personalize it. So some of those things that are harder to do actually allow you to connect, more. And
differentiate.
So, yeah, it's that balance again of like quality and quantity. And you want to really try to find that like middle point where it's balancing both, So
Excellent. Well, folks, thank you very much for taking the time. We're out of time here today. I would bring up my my conclusion slide, but unfortunately my screen sharing is broken right now. But Alea, Jeremey, thank you very much. For everybody who's attending right now, we'll make sure that we get your copy of Leading Sales Development out for you. And if you'd like any of those other kind of goodies, those Atrium goodies that we were talking about, you're welcome to sign up for those as well. But thank you very much, everyone, and we'll do another Modern Sales Book Club here in a month or so.